This is section 9.4, multiplying binomials. Okay, so first thing here, we're going to do kind of a real-life example of somebody making a garden split up into 4 different sections of vegetables, and it's on page 399 if in your book if you want to kind of look at something similar. So it's got Katie has a square herb garden in which she grows parsley. The measure of each side is X feet, and she wants to increase the length by 2 foot. She wants to increase the length by 2 foot and the width by 1 foot so she can grow sage, rosemary, and thyme. A plan for the garden is shown at the right. Find 2 different expressions for the area of the new garden. Okay, so basically we want to find area of this garden, and our dimensions are X foot and 1 foot, X foot and 2 foot. Okay, so what we can do here is we could start by finding the area of each square. So if I think about it, area is always length times width. So if I need to find the area of this first box here, my 2 dimensions would be x and x. So if I take x times x, that would be x squared for that box. This box here would be 1 foot going this way, and then it's x for my dimension going this way. So if I do x times 1, that would be x for the area of that box. This box here would be 2 foot on the side and then x on the top. So if I go 2 times x, that's 2x. And then my last corner here, it's going to be 1 foot by 2 foot. So if I do 1 times 2, that's 2. So now I've got the areas of each one of those little chunks of garden, you know, the thyme, the rosemary, the parsley, whatever. I've got the area of each of them individually, but I want the area of the garden as a whole. So what I can do here is I can just take all 4 of those areas and add them together. So I go x squared plus x plus 2x plus 2, and that would be my total area of my garden. Now, what I could also do with this is I could simplify a little bit, which simplify would be combining our like terms. So if we look here, we've got x by itself and 2x. So since those both have a variable of x and not like x squared or x to the third, just x by itself, we can combine those. So if I take x or 1x and add that to 2x, that makes 3x. And then I'm going to drop down my plus 2 and plus x squared. Okay, so that would be my area of my garden, and I couldn't simplify it any further than that. That would be it. Now, now another way, sorry, let me get a drink here. Another way of looking at this would be thinking about just the area of the whole thing. So if instead of having it split up into sections, we just had a chunk that was x and a chunk that was 1, well, together to get that whole side length, we could add those together. Same thing here, if we had x plus another chunk that was 2, we could add that together. So another way of thinking about this would be this times this, which would be x plus 2 times x plus 1. And that's what we're kind of going to focus on today, is multiplying things in parentheses like this, either using this method here or some other methods I'm going to show you. Okay. So we got a problem here. I'm going to show you 2 different ways to do this. You can do whichever way you want on the test. I don't really care, as long as you're getting to the right answer. Use whatever method you feel comfortable with. Okay, so what we've got here is we've got 2 separate binomials. So we talked about in the first section that we did what a binomial was, which would basically be 2 terms. So we got x minus 1. That would be a term there and a term there, split up by the subtraction. And then we're multiplying that by another binomial, x plus 5, so again 2 terms there. So what we can do is we can kind of set this up just like we did this garden problem up here. We can go x minus 1 is one of our side lengths, so x. Then when I do minus 1, I'm just going to think of it as like a negative 1. So you could think of it as plus a negative 1, just so you don't forget that negative. And then our other side length is x plus 5, so that would be a positive 5. So we could do the same thing as we did for the garden one and find the area of each one of those boxes. So if I did x times x, that would be x squared. Then this box here would be x here and 5 there, so x times 5 is 5x. And then down here, this side length would be x. This is negative 1, so negative 1 times x would be negative 1x or negative x. And then this bottom corner here would be negative 1 times 5, which would be negative 5. then what we could do is we could just add all those together. So we've got x squared plus 5x plus negative 1x plus negative 5. And then again, we have things we can combine together. We've got the x's. So we could add together 5x and negative 1x, which would make 4x, and then drop down our plus and negative 5, or that could be minus 5 if you wanted it to be, and drop down the x squared. And that would be our answer. Okay? So that's one method of doing it. If you like it that way, do it that way. If you're like, well, I don't want to draw out a box each time because that's a lot of work, there are other ways to do it. Okay, so I'm going to take that same problem and do it a different way here. So I've got x minus 1 times x plus 5. Okay, so I'm just going to show you another way to do this same problem. So another way you can think of this is kind of like the distributive property. I'm going to change my subtracting by 1 here to plus a negative 1, again, just so I don't forget about the negative there. So when I do this, I'm going to think about it as distributing to each one of these things back here. So I have to distribute both the x to the x and the 5 and the negative 1 to the x and the 5. So I'm going to take my x times my x, so x times x is x squared. I'm going to take my x times my 5, so x times 5 would be 5x. So now I took my x times everything that's back there. So now I don't have to worry about the x anymore. Now I worry about my negative 1. So now I'm going to take my negative 1 to my x, which negative 1 times x would be negative 1x, or negative x. And then the negative 1 to the 5, which when we multiply that, would be negative 5. And really, I got the same exact numbers I had before, so then when I go and combine, I can combine my x's together. So I'd have x squared plus 4x plus negative 5. So that would be the same exact answer as we just got above. Okay? Either one of those methods is fine. Whichever one you feel more comfortable with, do. Okay? Most of the time, I kind of do more a method like this, and I'll show you. It's called FOIL method. We'll do it in a little bit here. But I think that this way is a little bit easier for me to kind of comprehend. But if you like shapes and stuff, this might be a better bet for you. Okay? Just always, if you're going to do either one of these ways, just always be careful with those negatives. All right. Let's try another one here. Okay, so same thing. We're taking something in parentheses times something else in parentheses, each with 2 terms. And I'm just going to do it the second way, where I do kind of more like distributive property than draw the box out. But if you want to draw the box out, feel free. So I'm going to think about it as the a times the a squared. Maybe I should have changed this subtract 3 to plus negative 3. I don't have to, but I just like doing it that way. Alright, so I got to take my a times my 2a, which would be 2a squared. Then I'm going to take my a times my negative 3, which would be negative 3a. Then I'm going to take, so I took my a times everything, so now I don't have to worry about the a anymore. Now I'm going to take my 2 times both things, so I'm going to take 2 times the 2a, which would be 4a, and then my 2 times the negative 3, which would be negative 6. Then again, I can focus on my middles. So I've got negative 3a and 4a I can add together. So that would just be 1a, or a. And then I'm going to drop the other stuff down. So 2a squared plus those middles I know can add to a. And then I'm going to drop down my plus and negative 6, or it could be minus 6. Either way. Alright, so on page 400, try out A through D, and then I'll get you the answers. So for A, they got y squared plus 2y minus 8. For B, they got m squared minus 2m minus 3. For C, they got x squared minus 7x plus 10. And then for D, they got 2a squared minus 7a plus 6. And any of those where it has subtract, those could all be plus and negative. You can also write those in any order. It doesn't really matter. This is just typically the order you see, but it doesn't really matter the order as long as you've got your subtraction negatives with the number that goes directly behind it. Alright, the next thing we've got here is FOIL method. So FOIL method is probably one of the most common ways to do this, just because it's kind of easy for people to remember. I usually use this way because, like I said, it's easier to remember. So basically how this FOIL method works is we've got F stands for first, O stands for outside, I stands for inside, and then L stands for last. Okay? So what we do here is we take a problem just like we had here, and the F stands for first. So we're going to multiply together our two firsts. So I'm going to do this in different colors just so you can kind of see it a little bit here. So for first, I'm going to do red. So my first numbers here would be 3x and the x. So I'm going to multiply those. So 3x times x. Okay. And I got my plus in between. Next one I'm going to do purple. So my outside is the 3x, because that's on the outside, and the 2. So my outside would be the first number and the last number, because those are on the far outside. So this would be 3x times 2. Okay. And then the next one is inside. Inside I'm going to do in blue here. So inside would be my two inside numbers. So if the 3x and the 2 were outside, my insides are the 1 and the x. So I'm going to take 1 times x. And I'm going to have to get one more color here. I'm missing a color. Alright, so I got pink for last. So last is going to be our two last numbers. So our lasts are 1 and 2 because those are listed last in parentheses. So then it would be 1 times 2. Okay, so then, and you don't have to do it in colors. I just think the colors help to kind of keep things straight. So my first was the first things in parentheses, so 3x times x. So if I do take 3x times x, that comes out to be a 3x squared. Then I've got plus. And then my next one was outside. So my outsides here would be the 3x and the 2, because those are on the far outsides of the parentheses. So 3x times 2 comes out to 6x. Then I've got plus. And then my inside is my two innermost numbers, which would be the 1 and the x. So 1 times x is x, or 1x. And then plus. And then my lasts are the last two things in parentheses. So the 1 and the 2. And when I take 1 times 2, I get 2. So now, same as before, typically with these we can kind of simplify down a little bit. Not always, but usually you can. So we've got the 6x and the x that could be added together. So if I do 6x and x, that makes 7x. And I can drop the rest of the stuff down there, 3x squared and plus 2. So that would be my solution there. And like I said, that's probably the most common way that people do it. That's what people kind of reference when they're talking about multiplying binomials. They would probably, like if I showed them a problem like this and I said it's multiplying binomials, they wouldn't know what that meant. But if I said we were doing FOIL, they would go, oh, I know what FOIL is. So it's just a common math thing that people kind of use. You don't have to use it, but I do think it is an easy way to remember this. Alright, so let's try it here. So we're going to do the same thing. So we're going to do FOIL. So we're going to go first. So F is first. So our first would be d times d, which would come out to be d squared. Then our O is outside. So outside would be d times 8. So d times 8 is 8d. Then my next letter is I for inside. So I'm going to multiply my insides, which would be 2 times d, which is 2d. Then L stands for last, so I'd have 2 times 8, which is 16, so plus 16 at the end. And then again, I've got middles that I can add together, so if I do 8d and 2d, that makes 10d, plus 16, and then plus our d squared at the beginning. That would be our solution. Alright, let's try another one here. Okay, so again we're going to use FOIL. We do have a subtract in here, so you guys know I like to change subtracts to adding the opposite just because it helps. Then I'm going to do the same thing I was doing before, so I'm going to do FOIL. So I'm going to do first times first, so e times 2e, which would be 2e squared. Then I'm going to do outside for O, so e times negative 4, which would be negative 4e. Then I'm going to do 4 times 2e for inside, which would be 8e. And then I'm going to do last, so 4 times negative 4 would be negative 16. Then I know I've got middles I can combine. I can combine the negative 4e and the positive 8e. So I'd have 2e squared plus 4e plus negative 16. And that would be my solution. Now, you might be wondering if you can do FOIL in different orders. Yeah, so like say you spelled FOIL wrong, say you didn't remember how to spell it, and you maybe did F, and then instead of O, you went to I next and did inside before you did outside. That's totally fine. The order doesn't really matter. FOIL is just a way to keep track of it, but you could call it like, start with an L and go O-I-F or whatever that spells, you could do that too. They just use FOIL because it's a common word. Okay, so then we're going to do it again here. So again, we got to subtract, change it to adding the opposite. Then I'm going to do my FOIL here, so I'm going to do 5x times 4x for first. So that would be 20x squared. Then I'm going to do outside. So I'm going to do 5x times negative 2y. Now we know since those are different variables, I'm going to have to keep them separate. So I'm going to go the 5 times the negative 2, which would be negative 10, and then just the x times y. You can't combine them together to be like 2xy or xy squared or anything like that. It's just x times y. Okay, so that would be our outside. Our inside would be y times 4x, which would be 4yx or 4xy, either way. And then we've got y times negative 2y squared, which would be not times 2y squared. Y times negative 2y would be negative 2y squared. I was getting ahead of myself. Okay, now again here, we've got middles we can combine. This won't always happen, but majority of time it does. So even though here I have these letters written in a different order, so I got y and then x and then x and then y, you know with multiplication you can change the order around, so that's fine. Those can still combine together like we've been doing, as long as they've got the same variables. They don't have to be written in the same order, just they have to have the same letters with it. So then we're going to go 20x squared plus, and then if I do the negative 10xy plus 4yx, that would be negative 6xy or yx, either way. And then drop down my plus negative 2y squared. Or that could be minus there and minus there, either way. Alright, so check out on page 401, E through G, and then I'll get you the answers. So for E, they got n squared, they got n squared plus 8n plus 15. F, they got 2x squared minus 5x minus 12. G, they got 6x squared minus xy minus 2y squared. Okay? Alright, next one here, example 3, says find the product of a minus 2 and a squared minus 4. Alright, so we remember that product means multiply. So basically we are just multiplying these two values together. When we're multiplying these, we want to make sure that they're in parentheses because both of these are separate chunks. Okay, so when we multiply, we want to keep them as separate chunks. So we're going to go a minus 2 as a chunk times, because we're looking for product here, a squared minus 4. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we're just going to use our FOIL method again. So first thing I would probably do, since I've got subtraction there, probably change it to adding a negative and adding a negative just so I don't get confused. Then I'm going to do first, so that would be a times a squared, and remember when we're multiplying we add our powers together, so a would be like to the first times a squared would be a to the third plus, and then if we go outside it would be a times negative 4, which would be negative 4a. Inside would be negative 2 times a squared, which would be negative 2a squared. and then our last would be negative 2 times negative 4, which would come out to be a positive 8. So then when we go to combine these here, here we've got one with just an a, and here we've got one with an a squared, so we can't actually combine these middles. So this would just be your answer there, okay? Because even though they all have a's, they're to different powers, so we can't do that same combining stuff that we did before. So like I said, it works most of the time to do some combining in the middle, but not always. So just be careful on that. Don't just assume you can add the middle things together, because that's not always true, okay? Alright, so on page 402, look at H. So H, they got x to the third minus 2x squared plus 3x minus 6. Okay? Alright, so we got one more example here. So it's example 7. That's on page 402. So we've got the volume V of a rectangular prism is equal to the area of the base B times the height H. Express the volume of the prism as a polynomial. Okay, so we're going to have to do some work here before we get started. So I'm going to sketch myself out a rectangular prism here. Okay, so there's our box, and our bottom length is x plus 6. Going back here, we've got x, and then up the side, we've got x minus 1. Okay? So what they say is our volume is expressed as base times height. Okay, so when they're talking about base here, base is basically the bottom of this rectangle. Okay, so if we think about the bottom rectangle here, so like if it was kind of drawn in, I didn't do very good with the diagonals there. But if that was kind of drawn in at the bottom there, we basically want to figure out the area of the base or the area of the bottom of that rectangle. So if we look at our dimensions there, since it's a rectangle, we can go length times width. So to figure out the area of the base, we're going to do x plus 6 times x. I'm going to put the x on the outside, x plus 6 in parentheses. Then I'm just going to distribute like I normally do. So I'm going to do x times x, which would be x squared. Then I'm going to do x times the 6, which would be 6x. Okay, so what I just figured out there is my base, or the two bottoms multiplied together, is x squared plus 6x. Now I know for volume, I can take that base number, so x squared plus 6x, I'm going to write it here, x squared plus 6x, and I put it in parentheses because it's like a chunk, and I can take that times my height. Well, my height here would be x minus 1, so I can take it times x minus 1. Then I want to do the same FOIL stuff I've been doing, so if I take and multiply the x squared times the x, that would be x to the third. Then I do my outside, so it would be x squared times, think of this as like a negative 1 since it's minus there, so x squared times negative 1 would be a negative x squared. My insides here would be 6x times x, which would be 6x squared. And then my last would be 6x times, again, think of it like a negative 1, so negative 6x. Then I look to see if I can combine. Well, in this case I actually can, because I have an x squared. I have two of those, so I can combine those together. So if this is negative x squared, that's like a negative 1. So if I did negative 1 plus 6, that would be 5x squared. Drop down my plus negative 6x, drop down my x to the third. And that would be my answer. Okay, so that's all for notes. So your book page assignment is 403, 22 to 52 even.